All right, my fellow English teachers, I have another writing workshop for you in which we're going to use classic commercials to solidify writing introductions for FRQ2s, the rhetorical analysis portion of the AP language and composition exam. You also can do this for any on-level courses where you're teaching rhetorical analysis. It's a great way to really shore up how to hammer home the thesis when you're crafting a rhetorical analysis. So for this commercial, this particular writing workshop, I'm focusing on a Guinness beer commercial. And if you go to YouTube and type in Guinness beer wheelchair commercial, you'll be able to find it. For copyright purposes, I'm not allowed to include the commercial in my videos. I don't want to get in trouble for that. So you can find that on your own. So just Guinness beer commercial wheelchairs, and it's free in YouTube. So to give you some context, I teach on a block schedule. So I have 86 minutes per block. And ultimately, one of the things I do as an AP Lang and AP Lit teacher is, race against the clock. We know that our students have 3 essays to write under grueling time constraints. So in the 86 minutes that I had with them earlier this month, so we're in December, I've had them since Labor Day. So in early December, what we did was 3 commercials. So I used this one. I used the Ham's beer commercial and the Snickers Mr. T commercial. So they wrote 3 introductions in one class period. It's a lot of skill and drill, but I'm telling you, it so shores up how to do this and really demystifies the process if you teach it kind of like you're a composition coach. And one of the things that I do a lot of to get my students to write at the caliber that you're going to see them do in just a second is I Bob Ross my instruction. One of my essential questions that I'm always spouting off to anybody who will listen, it's the title of my textbook. What if we taught composition like Bob Ross teaches painting? I think it changes the whole paradigm of ELA instruction, because what it means is this. Teacher has to position himself or herself as the expert writer in the classroom. They're at the proverbial easel and canvas painting with the student, demystifying the process for them. But it goes above and beyond that. Bob Ross, as an expert as he was as a painter, only ever used one template. He called it a heuristic, and it's called the wet on wet technique. Every single time that man ever painted, he employed the wet on wet technique. And for my students, I give them templates as well, or heuristics, however you want to call it. So my guys, when they do introductions, depending on the expository mode and the prompt, will either declare the thesis or invert the thesis. Today, since we're doing rhetorical analysis, we're going to declare the thesis, and I'll give you plenty of exemplars and models on that. And then for body paragraphs, they know that they're always going to use the syllogistic construct, the syllogistic template to construct the body paragraph. So it totally demystifies the process. So for this particular class, what I did was we started with Mr. T Snickers, and I Bob Rossed it for them, and they basically followed my lead. For Hams, and for this particular Guinness one that we're going to look at next, we were cold. So I showed them the video 3 times. It's a commercial, so it's only 1 minute long. So I showed them the commercial 3 times and then just said, on your mark, get set, go, write. And what you're going to see is what they did in 11 minutes. I gave them 11 minutes to do it. So ultimately, as we proceed and get closer to exam time in May, I monitor their time a little bit more closely and eliminate time so that they're quicker and time won't be a factor come time of the exam. So the question's always this: how do I construct the introductory paragraph? Well, as I alluded to earlier, you can declare or invert, but hold on. We know that we're performing rhetorical analysis, so we're going to declare. And just to kind of qualify some things here, when you perform literary analysis, so all the FRQs on the AP literature exam, kids are going to invert. Rhetorical analysis, you declare. Argument, synthesis, persuasion, research, it's a 50-50 coin flip, pretty much contingent upon the prompt and how you want to get around the rhetorical situation. You can either declare or invert. Like I said, it's 50-50. So kids got to kind of choose their thunder and roll accordingly. So implicit in any FRQ2 prompt on the AP Lang exam, you have two questions. What is the authorial intent and how does the author construct meaning? No matter how the College Board cloaks it any given year, these two questions are always kind of latently there, just sort of tacitly there. So what my students do is this. They answer both of these questions. So how does the author construct meaning? You got to get into the terms, the devices, the techniques. Authorial intent is ultimately getting into universal truth, universal theme, exigence. So in literary analysis, what my students do is invert. They take 3 sentences to get to the authorial intent. 1 sentence construction of meaning. So whenever you drop your answer to construction of meaning, that's the pithiness of your thesis statement. So in literary analysis, you drop it last. In rhetorical analysis, you lead with how does the author construct meaning. So that's why it's declarative, because you're declaring the thesis out of the gate. And my students usually take 3 sentences to answer how does the author construct meaning. 1 sentence, what is the authorial intent? So the paradigm or the template's ultimately 3 plus 1. It's always going to be 4 sentences long. So on my board, in my classroom, I have this poster. It's a little Velcro poster that I made. And we compile all the terms, devices, techniques that students have seen throughout the academic year. And as they read these commercials or letters or speeches, text, whatever, I tell them find the 3 most salient and put those into your construction of meaning. So with this particular one, again, we did not do any Socratic seminars, no fishbowls, no Harkness discussions, no Plato discussion. Cold read. I showed it to them 3 times and they wrote. And I'll show you what they came up with in just a second here. So this is the diagram I use for declarative, right? So begin with the thesis. How does the author construct meaning? 3 sentences. What is the authorial intent? Last sentence. It's always going to be 4 sentences long. You got to sprinkle in a little bit of context and background without getting plot summative. We have to keep in mind we're performing rhetorical analysis and not plot analysis. And then the kickers here is that my students have gone through an intensive word study academy with me and an intensive nuance academy. All the way from the beginning of September. After Labor Day, I inherited my group of students. So you're going to see what they're doing in December, beginning of December. So my students, most of them come to me with limited vocabs, and I know that I have to help them augment that, quickly and exponentially over the course of the academic year so that they have the swagger needed to rock some sophistication points on the AP exam. So you're going to see my students use a fair amount of tier 2 level vocabulary. And what I mean by that is your average run-of-the-mill SAT level caliber word. But my students don't overdo it. They stay in their wheelhouse. Every now and then, I like to see some tier 2 with colloquial and vernacular. I like to see that teeter-tottered. I think that it's important when we're trying to get the sophistication point not to overly geek out and sound pedantic and contrived. The kids need to be in their wheelhouse. They need to be their academic best 16, 17-year-old selves, right? And a really, punky kid at 16, 17 has flair, pizzazz, a little bit of spunk to him. And that's why I like the colloquial and the vernacular in there. And you'll see that in just a second. The Nuance Academy, we get heavy into Strunk and White's Write It Right. And in that manual, they have something called Rule 18. And Rule 18 articulates that there's 12 different ways to construct a single sentence. So my students have memorized this. They've mastered it for the most part. They know how to bust out some syntactical punches to wield sentences for voice, rhythm, and flow. They got, can crank sentences for effect and purpose. So you won't see my students do short, simple declarative sentence, independent clause stacked upon independent clause. They got much better flow than that. And you'll see them make some pretty advanced decisions with their sentence constructs. And as I've stated, every introduction's 4 sentences long. So let's take a look at a few for the Guinness Wheelchair commercial. A common human characteristic is the drive for acceptance, friendship, and belonging. And this is why Guinness is made for more. Consuming this mere product can gain one all of these things plus so much more. Heavy on the emotional appeal, the producers emphasize that this particular brand of stout beer can supply everyone with the promise of an everlasting shared bond of fidelity and companionship, no matter their particular lot in life. For those wanting this level of human connection, this is the magical panacea according to the manufacturer, right? So my students do a lot of implication with their lit terms. So by saying emotional appeal, we know we're into pathos. They got the logos articulated. They got the authorial intent articulated. But ultimately, I want my students to, in terms of construction of meaning, focus on like the 3 most salient things that this commercial does. And this student does it perfectly, right? The main thing in this is the emotional appeal. Right, but also the ethos and the logos is very, very important in this as well. And they've dropped all that, so they front loaded this. So as they move on to their body paragraphs, everything's front loaded for the line of reasoning. Note the diction, right? It's up there. It's definitely academic, but it doesn't sound goon worthy, right? It's definitely in this student's wheelhouse. And then the sentence constructs are nice and supple and flowing. My students, I'm very guilty of teaching my students the dash, and I've had comments. People have left comments in my YouTube channel that my students get a little dash heavy, and perhaps they do, but I think it's a good stylistic trick. And I like this magical panacea according to the manufacturer. Like really good spunkiness here in terms of the diction of this kid. And I think any AP reader would get to the end of this and say, wow, definite thesis, clearly articulated. And if this kid can do this for the rest of the essay, they definitely are getting the sophistication point. And it's all a template, 3 + 1. That's all it is, right? Every single time. So here's a student that is equally good a writer. On a psychological level, the bulk of humanity desires close bonds and everlasting friendship. Drinking Guinness beer, regardless of whatever setbacks life may have thrown your way, is the gatekeeper to human bonds that transcend the ordinary and commonplace. Playing upon the emotions of those who yearn for such human connectivity, the promise is simple. Go out on the town, drink some Guinness, and have the best friends in the world. Everything from the melody of the music to the diction supports this logos. And again, focus on the 3 most salient terms, get to the universal truth, the exigence, the theme, however you want to call it. As one student said, called it the choke collar, get the choke collar, and however you want to call it. So 3 + 1 every single time. Right? And it doesn't even necessarily matter how you arrange it. It just has to be in there. And this kid unquestionably has a very strongly asserted thesis. The terms, the devices are in there, and both questions are thoroughly answered. And again, I think this kid set himself up well for the sophistication point as well. So here's one last one. Drinking, for most people, is a social activity done with close family and friends. This is why people go out on the town, to make everlasting friendships and even find the diamond in the rough to spend forever and ever with. Playing upon the audience's need for companionship and human connection, Guinness pours on the pathos in everything from the background music, cast of characters, and even its diction. The logic is clear. If one wants killer friendships, one needs to drink Guinness. And I like this one a lot too because my students are really trying to play with their diction a little bit in terms of finding that sweet spot of, how colloquial can you be? How much vernacular can you put in there? And how much tier 2 do you need? And I like that the student experimented with even find the diamond in the rough to spend forever and forever with, right? It's kind of cheeky. It's cute that, a 16, 17-year-old, can write like that. Pours the pathos in everything from the background music, cast of characters, and even its diction. The logic is clear. If one wants killer friendships, one needs to drink Guinness. So I can see some AP readers might be like, ooh, that's a little too informal. But for me, early in December, I like it. I like that my students are experimenting and they're crushing the template, right? It's always 3 + 1 every single time that they write. They can declare the thesis and come out of the gate swinging like this without fail. So if you got questions or want to try your hand at this and would like these slides to use for your own classroom use for your own writing workshop, feel free to drop me a line at teachingwritingcoach@gmail.com. Note that all of my professional development opportunities are now hosted through the National Writing Project. We're teaming up and collaborating. So my Teach It Right 5-week mastermind, the self-paced course, and all my monthly one-off series are being housed by NWP, which is great news if you need PD hours because they are accredited and love to give out those badges of completion. So check that out at www.teachinghowtowrite.com. You can find all the information you need there on those courses. So be well, happy teaching, happy writing.